For those of you that don't know me, I am Dr. Narda Robinson, as it says here on the screen, and I'm an osteopathic physician and a veterinarian, and the founder and CEO of CuraCore Vet and our human counterpart, which is CuraCore Med. So, welcome to today's webinar. It's on cannabis pharmacology, a beginner's guide. Okay, probably a lot of you already know to some degree of stuff about cannabis, maybe from your personal experience or from what you're doing in your practices. There remain a lot of things unknown and a lot of confusion out there. And just so it's clear with you, I don't have any stock in any cannabis companies. I don't work for any. I'm not paid for any for by any. So on and so forth. So I don't have something for you to buy from me about cannabis. So I feel like that's a good thing because then I am not biased or trying to sell you something. So we're going to go through what's in cannabis and how does it work just in general. I do have a 20-hour online program on cannabis, so we actually spend a lot of time and go very deeply into the topic. But this is a beginner's guide. So how does it work in general? What does it treat? And many of you are already aware that you're thinking about pain or anxiety. Is it safe? So we have some questions about that. Is it legal? Just to cut to the chase there, you will hear various representatives from companies claim that because of the Farm Bill or this or that or the other thing, what they're trying to get you to buy and sell to your clients is legal. I challenge you and them to find any veterinary board in the United States or Canada to condone your stocking and selling and prescribing a cannabis product. So, whether it's in the nutraceutical or, slash supplement or whatever category, I mean, unless it's hemp seed, which is a nutritional item, all these things are really in a gray and ever shifting zone. But when it comes right down to it, your license to practice veterinary medicine, if you are a veterinarian, comes from your state board. So, is it cool with them or not? And then your license to prescribe medications, if you are a veterinarian, comes from the DEA. So, yeah, where are they on that? So, I still think though that it's not that big of a problem because so much of this stuff is over the counter. So that shouldn't be, I believe, where the conversation gets stalled because cannabinoid medicine is a really exciting field. And I think that you need to know about the pharmacology as you would any other botanical product or any medication. We need to know the pharmacology. So ultimately, it will, I think, all be fine and legal. But where are you going to be in terms of knowing which products to choose and why? So that's where, again, as with any herb, and last webinar I covered botanical medicines for pain and inflammation. Some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today will build on that information. So if you haven't seen it, it might be good for you to go and watch that. Because whether this is ginseng or boswellia or lavender or cannabis, it still behooves you to know about what kind of active chemicals there are, what kind of research shows that it's helpful or not helpful, and for what might it interact with, and how would we gauge the quality, and so on. So just one of all these different types of plants. And then what is a COA? So um, we'll talk about that too. To cut to that chase, it's a certificate of analysis. And would that we would have the ability to have certificates of analysis for every botanical product. I mean, that's where cannabis is way out in front. So I put here a representative figure. Of course, it's a stock photo from Shutterstock, but I don't have the actual person. But Sharon, our director of education and events, and I were in an adjacent country a couple years ago giving a full day workshop on cannabis, pharmacology and actions and legal issues and so on. And right at the beginning of the day-long workshop, one of the veterinarians that I will call Dr. B, and she will be my representative for that expression that that veterinarian had, just came right up to me before it started and said, well, let's see what she said. I am going to prescribe cannabidiol or CBD. Tell me what product to use. Tell me what it treats best and the dose. I don't care how it works. And I know it's safe. So who cares that my regulatory authority said, we're not there yet? You cannot be prescribing this. There's all these unknowns still. She was adamant. I'm going to be doing it. I don't care, all the specifics. So essentially, she was only there for me to tell her what to prescribe for what condition, what dose, and she's going to do it. I mean, in that amount of time. So in a way, this is geared for that type of person also, who is not a skeptic by any means, but also doesn't care about what's in it. So we're going to talk about what's in it and see if that can make a difference. Because shouldn't we know as much as we can for our patients? So we get into any kind of plant-based medicine, and there are several things that we should find out, as I've already elucidated. For cannabis, what are the main constituents? So cannabinoids, which we will talk about, terpenoids, which you may or may not have heard about, and flavonoids. Those are the three top chemical constituents that we're interested in. Okay, so, all right. Well, Dr. B has heard of something like this and asks, is that the entourage effect? And some people in the cannabis research industry or field have have suggested that maybe instead of entourage effect, where everybody's just doing their own, it's like a mob or something, that it could be called an ensemble effect because like perhaps a musical ensemble, there is some synergy, some complexity and interactions that are making what the end result is clinically and pharmacologically more than just a sum of each individual constituent. So good for Dr. B. She knew about the entourage effect. And that's why you can't just come in and say, I want to know what CBD product to use. Well, when you first even say, I want to prescribe CBD, oh, so you don't care about any of the other cannabinoids, you don't care about any of the terpenes, and you don't care about any of the flavonoids. That is going to limit your clinical efficacy. So you should care about those things. So just briefly, we're going to touch on cannabinoids and then we'll come back to it. But just so you have sort of a chemistry appreciation for the cannabinoid structure, you see here between each chemical. So we have here THC and THCV, few carbons, that's about the difference there. When we look at THC versus cannabidiol, it's not cannabidiol, it's cannabidiol. So we see that, we see, oh, okay, this is an open segment here versus it's closed here. So fairly mild changes between the different cannabinoids. And while I will be focusing on CBD and THC, keep in mind that there are probably 150. I mean, you can get different numbers from different people, but there's well over 100 cannabinoids within the cannabis plant that are interesting. And because this is a beginner's guide, we're just going to mainly be focusing on CBD and a little bit on THC. But before we do, in light of the people like Dr. B, who didn't formally care about anything else but the CBD, let's talk a little bit about the terpenes or terpenoids, which are another family of chemical structures that are really quite interesting. And then we'll be circling back to cannabinoids, but it's so exciting even to talk about the other stuff in cannabis. So you probably recognize what this is, right? Yeah, lavender. We don't have smell-o-vision, but if we did, now this would be an interesting smell-o-vision thing right here. So on the left, we have some lavender flowers, and on the right, we have possibly a marijuana bud here. And when you look more deeply even, Look at these little glistening items here on the flower, and all these little sort of specks. We're not seeing that in close up, but we saw it in the botanical course, the previous one that we talked together with. And those are the little trichomes. They're little modified hair glands, and that's where the cannabinoids, the terpenes, and the flavonoids are produced. So that's where this stuff most desirable to us is most highly concentrated. But why I bring up lavender with cannabis is because within all these different plants, the terpenes, as well as the flavonoids, but let's talk about terpenes, that is, those chemicals are so widespread through a whole bunch of different plants you are very familiar with. So sometimes maybe in school you had seen or heard, go from what you know to what you don't know. So you might not be as familiar with cannabinoids, but you might be more familiar with like lavender and other floral type plants. And so this is why, for those of you that have been in a dispensary of marijuana, and you see those jars on the shelf, and nowadays it's a problem because you don't want to be inhaling something that somebody else has breathed on. But in the good old days of 5 weeks ago, you could go into a marijuana dispensary if it was available in your state and get a whiff of what the aroma was from that batch of plant matter. And the aroma is determined by the complexity and profile of the terpenes and terpenoids, because that is what is conferring the scent to it. CBD and THC, when they're all distilled up, they are considered odorless. Um, of course, sometimes you still in a CBD kind of extract. I don't have one near here, but you can still smell that cannabis type odor, and it's probably because there is some terpene in that mixture. But anyway, so linalool is one of the ingredients in some strains of cannabis that tend to smell floral, rose, or woody. And why this is really significant is that even though Dr. B thought that she only wanted a straight CBD kind of preparation, it, if we are to practice informed cannabinoid medicine, then we would be more likely to be drawn to a composite formulation that has some linalool of the terpenes in it if our patient was maybe anxious and if we needed to calm them down. Consider if we had a seizure patient, of which cannabidiol extracts are often thought about and recommended nowadays. Um, if we saw a presence of terpenes that had linalool in it, then that could draw us more to that certain strain or preparation. Here's another type of terpene in cannabis, and it's geraniol, and that's found in rose petals. So again, another floral one. And here, if we look at just even one recent drug development kind of paper, the language is a little clunky because it's not necessarily from the US, but just even the research done on terpenes shows us that there are beneficial pharmacologic effects from these ingredients as well, which helps to flesh out our understanding of the clinical benefits that we can derive from a fuller spectrum type of cannabis derivative. So, for example, here, I mean, they use the term drugability in the green box, but with 38 putative identified target genes, and that these targets were associated with cancer, inflammatory, immunoreactions, and other physiologic processes. So, the more we understand about each active constituent within a cannabis strain, the more we can predict and opt for or steer away from what um, what we're desiring for that patient. And to reinforce what we learned last time, remember that your friend for online shopping, free shopping for informative articles to satisfy your intellectual curiosity comes through pubmed.gov and then you insert your search terms. Here I just put geraniol, maybe pharmacology. And where you know it's free is when you have in that right-hand section PMC, free full text. You also see it elsewhere, like at the bottom of this abstract, free PMC article. And that means you get to have fun and read things that are informative and interesting. Um, in contrast to linalool, which was more relaxing, sedating, we have limonene that's found in citrus type products. So now citrus, if you know anything about essential oil like aromatherapy, you would use a citrus type of smell to be more awakening and alerting and just kind of clarifying in some way, versus lavender scent will kind of be more somnolent. And so again, if you had an animal that maybe needed a little bit more brightness in their head, that would be where a higher component of limonene in a formulation might be nice to have. So here is the chemical structure of limonene, flavor and aroma, because the flavor is impacted as well. So citrusy and sweet. But this one, as you know, because you've seen so many citrus cleaning products, there are antibacterial aspects to it. And it does raise your mood, and it helps on some level to relieve stress. So again, when we think of cannabis and why people gravitate toward it or consider it for their animal, there is a whole complexity and spectrum of benefits. And it's not just because it's cannabidiol. So when I was first recruited to start the research investigations at Colorado State University back in 2015 and 2016, and we had a big old meeting from representatives all across campus, like from textiles and chemistry, and I was representing the clinical with the veterinary, um, and just the main administration and everything. I was sitting next to one of the chemists who was very adamant, and he said, "Not until we find out what each everything that's in cannabis does, should we be even testing it clinically, blah, blah, blah." And it's like, A, that's never going to happen, that you're going to test each constituent individually. And B, um, so that would just be, we'd all be dead, 300 years and it'd be later. But there, with that entourage effect, there is the polypharmacy piece. So how are they interacting with each other? It's not just additive, but it can be synergistic. It can be antagonistic. So that's really a lot of the fun of botanical medicine, not from an energy mystical metaphorical standpoint, but from really the pharmacology, even because so many of these cross over into food as well. Like, how does food affect behavior and mental processes and health and resistance to disease and oxidation and even, viruses and other things. So what do you think these are? These little balls? Are these like 3 foot wide, like gym balls that you could also massage your back with, or could they be peppercorns? You would be right if you chose B. And interestingly, as well, look just down at the surface, and just that sort of rugged, or just it's not really an orange peel surface, but it's certainly not smooth. And how does this what happens when you grind these? Like, where is the active constituent? Here we're interested in beta caryophyllene. And if you do decide to take my online course, there is a question somewhere in there I ask about the active terpene in black pepper. And just hint, it won't be enough to say caryophyllene, because you need to say beta caryophyllene, because that's what's in black pepper, versus alpha caryophyllene is what is in is another thing altogether, and that's called humulene. So it's another thing. But beta caryophyllene is in black pepper. It's also in cloves and rosemary and hops. So and more. But beta caryophyllene is a really significant terpene. As we talk about the endocannabinoid system, of all of these terpenes and flavonoids that we're going to be mentioning, it's beta caryophyllene that actually does interact with endocannabinoid receptors, and it interacts with the CB2 receptors, which is part of your immune system, and it's still all over the place. But it really brings to the foreground, like, some of the nice attributes of these plant products, especially black pepper. And also, at the last meeting of us with the botanical webinar for pain and inflammation, we talked about piperine from black pepper helping to really accentuate the absorption of curcumin. So, no wonder that these ancient cultures were using so many of these interesting seasonings, as well as using them for their antibacterial, like food preservation aspect. Okay. And here we have, yeah, this is the much more complex chemical structure of beta caryophyllene as compared to limonene, and the health effects: antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and neuroprotective. Those are all fantastic health attributes. And especially it's the anti-inflammatory piece that we're often after, as well as neuroprotective, but anti-inflammatory is going to complement the ability of the cannabinoids to also counter inflammation. And then that third category, remember, Dr. B just wanted to hear about cannabidiol, but here we have flavonoids, and got a bunch of flavonoids staring at you. So the terpenes and terpenoids gave us the smell and aroma and taste, whereas flavonoids are giving us all this glorious color. And okay, so she's becoming a bit overwhelmed, and maybe that was it, is that she just didn't feel like she could process. But perhaps with a little CBD, she would be more open to learning more. But there's just a ton of flavonoids that are, um, present in cannabis. They haven't been studied as much as the terpenes and the cannabinoids, but there is, a lot of growing interest even on their own, because quercetin is is present in cannabis. It's just present in a lot of these, in plants, because plants have to defend themselves against oxidation and harsh realities of over sunlight and drought, and people come, or animals coming and nibbling on them and everything. So they have a repertoire that are called like these secondary kind of derivatives that help protect them. It goes beyond just, building their plant structure. So quercetin is found a lot of different places. And if we look, again, PubMed.gov, and here is free online shopping again, flavonoids are now considered an indispensable component in a variety of nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, medicinal, and cosmetic applications. And you can see here again, we are, reinforcing the antioxidative, anti-inflammatory, anti-mutagenic, anti-carcinogenic aspects of cannabis in terms of the cannabinoids with the flavonoids. So they too are very important. And as I said, there's quercetin in cannabis. There's also in berries, apples, cauliflower, tea, cabbage, nuts, onions. I mean, just so many different things. And that has been found as useful in allergic, metabolic, inflammatory disorders, arthritis, and so on. So we, again, have this overlap or reinforcement of cannabinoid activity. So what is a cannabinoid? Okay, the classic definition is that it's one of a class of diverse chemical compounds that acts on cannabinoid receptors. So when we start to talk about cannabinoid receptors, we're getting into the realm of the endocannabinoid system, which you did not learn in school most likely. I think even if you're in school currently, you're not learning about the endocannabinoid system in your pharmacology course or your neurology course. If you are, let me know so I can stop saying this. But it's a very broad, widespread, hugely receptor rich system that has existed in us and other mammals, probably, who knows when it began, but it's just as important as your serotonergic system, your dopaminergic system, your endogenous opioid system, your endogenous, anxiolytic benzodiazepine type system. And it just hadn't been known until Raphael Mechoulam, the granddaddy of cannabis research, started looking for an endogenous substrate that was responsible for making the effects of THC what they are in your brain. And he came upon the endocannabinoid system. And so he named it because he was looking for an endogenous receptor system for exogenous cannabinoids, but he could have called it Endo XYZ system. It's just that he was there, he was first, and he named it. But again, that shouldn't put you off. It shouldn't mean we shouldn't talk about it in school, because it could be responsible for a whole bunch of disorders that we are currently trying to treat and maybe getting somewhere, especially when we're adding medical acupuncture and, medical massage and photomedicine and all that, but because they work with the endocannabinoid system as well, but that have thus far really elucidated, putting your finger on it and what the real problem is. So, like migraines or fibromyalgia or irritable bowel syndrome, which is not inflammatory bowel disease, but just a lot of things that have been widespread but hard to pin down, and often the person or animal exhibiting it is just a real frustration to the practitioner because they don't know what to do. But here we have a window open to a system that could have gotten, messed up somehow, and that we can interact with it in a meaningful manner if we can not just say, I want to prescribe CBD, tell me what to do, but to say, wow, we have a whole bunch of active constituents in our repertoire, even in this cannabis product, and how can we manipulate things to really optimize and resettle that endocannabinoid system so it can do what it needs to do, which is to help balance neurologic function within the body. It's so widespread. It deals with the immune system, the metabolic system. It's just your endogenous homeostatic regulator. It's really, really important. And it comes out in times of stress and a lot of pain is when it's most activated. But that's another webinar in itself. So going back to what you already know endogenous neurotransmitter systems. So there's a ligand, a substance that binds to receptors. Then there's the receptors themselves, which are these chemical protein structures that will, bind to that ligand and either deform or do something that will then send signals down to change that individual's state of physiology. And then you need enzymes or some way to turn off that system as well so that it can be more tightly regulated. So Dr. B excelled in neuroscience in her undergraduate career. And so now she's getting interested in the endocannabinoid system. So we're making some progress. She particularly remembered dopamine. Dopamine is intrinsically rewarding just by dint of its chemical nature. And you see here that there is a bouton here, your synaptic bouton, that has your synaptic vesicles, your vesicles with neurotransmitters, and then those combine to that presynaptic membrane, release that neurotransmitter that crosses the synaptic cleft, goes to your postsynaptic membrane, and blends with that, binds with the dopamine receptor, and then exerts a signal on that recipient cell. Well, so we can talk about the endocannabinoid system with some remembrance of all that very simple neurotransmission. But there are some differences, and that again is why it'd be nice to have a webinar just on the endocannabinoid system. For one thing, your cannabinoid receptors are located on that presynaptic membrane, not the postsynaptic membrane. And as we see here, you've got endocannabinoids, so lipid precursors in that postsynaptic cell. And from that, like arachidonic acid and such, we're going to get the endogenous cannabinoids like anandamide or 2-AG. They're going to come out of there and cross that cleft and actually bind to that presynaptic membrane, which is then going to do different things like regulate calcium release, which is going to change neurotransmission. So a whole bunch of stuff to talk about there. This is another pictorial representation of the endocannabinoid system. So endo meaning internal, just like endogenous opioids. So they are coming out of that. Here's the postsynaptic membrane in the pink EC, and coming across there, you've got your presynaptic membrane, your CB1 receptors, let's say. And so that's how that works in us. It's doing it right now. If you can feel it. You got it? Okay. So you may not have THC in your system, probably not, especially if you're at work. But that was just circulating, okay? And so that's not coming out of the postsynaptic membrane. That's coming just in the milieu and is going to still bind, but it's only going to be a partial agonist. That's not a full agonist. But it's still going to have effects as an agonist would. So cannabinoids, then back to the definition, cannabinoids are ligands for the receptors, and they can come from your system naturally. They can come from plants, or they can be made artificially, which is not something that we love because the effects aren't that desirable. And so the two most notable phytocannabinoids, as we've said, are THC and cannabidiol. So delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. You got to get the rhythm right. Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol and cannabidiol. And then there are well over 100 of others. And so oftentimes we think about those for the most part when we're talking about the clinical effects of cannabis, but keep in mind it does matter if you have the terpenes and the flavonoids in there too, or has that product merely extracted, like has the manufacturer merely extracted the CBD out of there, for instance, if it's animal. So what are the activities that we are interested pharmacologically? Pain relief, so analgesia, anxiety, so she's a bit anxious there, and she feels like this, and if there was a rug, she might wanna hide under it before whatever procedure she's about to have happens. So anti-anxiety, analgesic, antispasmodic, muscle relaxant, and anti-inflammatory. So as we even go through the general basis of action of these various constituents, it then behooves us to think about what are the applications then. So for pain, are we thinking musculoskeletal pain? Are we thinking skin irritation pain? Are we thinking mental pain? So we think about, okay, what's the mechanisms of action and where is that pain going to be? Is it abdominal pain? Now, when we think about antispasmodic, is that smooth muscle or is that skeletal muscle or is it both? We talked in the botanical medicine webinar about peppermint being a smooth muscle relaxant. It also has some skeletal muscle relaxation ability. So again, that's the fun of botanical medicine. There's so many things that do that, and so many ways that they act that we can be creative and we can be smart and science based about where these effects are going to do us good. So for inflammation, acute inflammation, okay, we have different things that anti-inflammatory benefits would help with. With cannabis, we tend to often think about it for more chronic problems and osteoarthritis, but that doesn't mean we can't use a little bit of salve externally for an acute inflammation. And here's anticonvulsant effects. Seizure disorders are often chronic, but we have a seizure in the moment. So what do we need to do in terms of administration to best reduce that? So cannabinoid chemistry, we already looked at that some, looking at it again, and the structures here and the different cannabinoids. When we put them together, I forget where I got this on the website, but this is not my development, but we have the different actions that have been compiled, and I always like to find the primary studies of this, but it is a handy compilation because you'll see, like there's one veterinary cannabis hemp supplier that's been adding a lot of CBDA to the formulations. So you might be interested just here. Okay, where does CBDA? What's its kind of claim to fame? Okay, it looks like it's mainly anti-inflammatory, which should be with 2-MC. I didn't do that. So, um, but anyway, but CBD seems to check a whole bunch of boxes as well. So um, you can find a lot of these compilations online, but again, I do like to dig into the literature and find the original studies that will back up, what the claims are. But we do know about CBD as having many different effects on many different transmitters. However, it doesn't engage directly with endocannabinoid system. So if you just care about CBD, you're not going to get a lot of traction when you study the endocannabinoid system because that's really where THC has its main playground. CBD is considered a negative allosteric modulator, so it will help to dampen some of the less desirable THC, but it has so many other effects on the serotonergic system, on opioid system. It modulates calcium channel activity, as you see here, inhibits reuptake of endogenous endocannabinoids, which if you think back to your neurotransmitter science, that's going to mean that if you're inhibiting reuptake, like if you inhibited reuptake of serotonin, then you're going to get more of that still in that synaptic cleft to make its actions known. And then all those cool effects, like for neurologic diseases or injury of some type or pain, the neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and then for blood flow, the vasorelaxant. So there's a lot of interest in the veterinary profession. There are a lot of different studies taking place. We'll look at some that have already been published, again, on the Free Shopping Network of PubMed.gov. But human clinical trials, look at all these things and look at the diversity. So dementia, memory loss, been studied with tens of thousands of people in Israel, where Raphael Mechoulam is, showing some benefits there. Osteoporosis and bone healing, that's more with the CB2 receptor, so it behooves you to learn about the endocannabinoid system for that. Cancer, epilepsy, depression, anxiety, diabetes, metabolic regulation, inflammatory bowel disease, that anti-inflammation. So you see here that once you get a better grasp of the mechanisms, then we can think about, oh, that could be good here, that could be good there. So the initial studies with the veterinary world are osteoarthritis and epilepsy, and we're showing some value there. But there's so much more to do. And then again, thinking of, well, what's in each of them, which we'll cover a little bit. Of what's in a product, and that gets us back to the certificate of analysis, that how can you compare one manufacturer's stuff that has, the CBD and CBDA and a whole spectrum of rich smelly terpenes and all that stuff versus another company's, like, oh yeah, we're mainly CBD, we're good with that, So you have two different studies. It's like, well, okay, but that one study that studied that one product says that is good for that condition that they looked at. But will that one product work for the other conditions that the other study with the other product worked for? Yeah, probably. I mean, there is a lot of redundancy in these mechanisms of action, as you saw, but we don't know for sure. So there is a difficulty in extrapolating it because they're not all testing the same thing. So here in this paper, 2020, it does talk about One Health. So did you forget about One Health? Don't do that, because there's good reason to think about human and animal health. And then the health of the planet. I think our current COVID-19 thing speaks strongly to that. But they are here advocating for cannabis to be used more and to be accepted in veterinary medicine. So yay for that. I think that's Frontiers in Veterinary Science. Preliminary investigation of the safety of escalating cannabinoid doses in healthy dogs. And looking here in this pink box, looking at increasing the dose from about 2 to 62 milligrams per kilogram. Yeah, it was better when you use CBD than THC. I think we probably already knew that, but okay, you got a publication, that's good. And this was Stephanie McGrath and others from CSU. And looking at the pharmacokinetics of cannabidiol and looking at two different dosages. So 10 milligrams per kilogram body weight or 20 milligram body weight. Exposure, your concentrations are dose proportional. And so where are you going to land? Because other studies have looked at, 0.1 to 0.2 milligrams per kilogram body weight, or 2 or 4 or 8. And the more rich your product is with cannabidiol and other things, oftentimes it's more expensive. So there is interest in, like, well, how much do I really need and how often do I need to dose it? And that's, again, these are for certain formulations. Is it oral infused oil? Is it transdermal cream? Is it oil and beads? I mean, when you look at the different type of preparations, you go from a THC lip balm to a suppository, I mean, and everything in between. So there's all that fun stuff to learn as well. But in essence, these studies are putting together more and more information, not showing rampant deaths, not really showing much of anything, except sometimes this increase in alkaline phosphatase during CBD treatment. Questions that arise: how will that work in the long run? Do we have to have concerns with that? But this study, from Cornell, et cetera, looking at 2 milligrams per kilogram of CBD twice a day for osteoarthritic dogs. Here's Stephanie McGrath's publication, Good It Got in JAVMA, because for a while there, it looked like cannabis studies weren't going to be published in the mainstream. So I know with ours that we did with Canapet, just to survey what people were using it for, one of the very first studies on cannabis in animals, we couldn't get it published in any of the mainstream journals because they were afraid to touch it. So anyway, still some questions about how good it was versus placebo in dogs with epilepsy, but showing a significant reduction with the CBD group. Again, what was in that? What else was in it? Can we see the certificate of analysis with that? Okay, so and just looking, we don't have any questions yet, which is fine. I'll just keep talking, and I don't mind doing that because I love talking about cannabis. So Sativex, Sativex, as you see here, this is an FDA approved drug, and it is just applied in the mouth. So it's like, I think it's an oral spray, and it's about 1 to 1. It's a little high. It's like 1.08 to 1 THC to cannabidiol. And so here they're actually looking at a THC CBD kind of equivalent mixture for dogs. Um, it's marketed for treatment of spasticity and pain in multiple sclerosis patients and is being investigated for other central and peripheral pathological conditions. And maybe it does have value in veterinary medicine. So here they're looking at it, and yeah, given to naive dogs via sublingual delivery. And from their conclusion, because it was online shopping and free, I cut and pasted this conclusion. Our study demonstrates that single or multiple dose sublingual administration of Sativex to naive dogs was well tolerated. So remember, this is THC to THC and CBD, but it's just a little spritz. It's not a plate of chocolate chip cookies that have 10, 20, 30% THC in them. So is it possible then to get get us over ourselves about the THC phobia? And yep, Dr. B isn't really interested in that right now. She needs some more time. Deanna, you asked how do you get a COA on a product? Good question. And you can contact the company. Some companies say, "Oh, we're so super transparent, and we put them on the web." Um, so COAs are a gnarly kind of thing, and we'll go into that too at the end. But what you want ideally, and I was going to bring some various products. I didn't bring them up here. So what you want ideally is to be able to match the batch number or the little code on the bottle or your preparation. You want to know what's in that item. You don't necessarily care as much about the product that they may have produced 2 years ago or 3 months ago, which raises the issue of batch to batch variability. So, another thing that's different between plant medicine and synthetic or pharmaceutical medicine is that you're going to have all kinds of variations depending on growing season, the fertilization in the soil, the time of harvesting, how it was cared for after harvesting, how old is it, all kinds of things happen that change the chemical nature of a plant-based extract. And so, um, if you had a patient that was receiving something and doing pretty well, this happens, with children with Dravet's, these congenital, really horrible seizures. Like you want to be sure that next month they're going to have that same product so that you're not going to have breakthrough seizures and not know what happened. So there is a need for manufacturers to ensure batch to batch variability. Harder to do with edibles, and that's another story. But there's we'll look at um, certificates of authenticity, but where you get it is you get it from the manufacturer. What are you getting? Is it, so to speak, junk, which some people will say when they see certain things, or is it legit? And of course, if the manufacturer is a good business person, they're going to try to make you like the product, but it is it is it authentic? Is it really for what they're selling, and so on? Okay, so you probably already know, but if you don't, THC, delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and cannabidiol have different endocannabinoid effects. THC acts directly with the endocannabinoid system as a partial agonist. CBD doesn't act directly with it. It acts on a lot of other neurotransmitters, and only acts indirectly on the endocannabinoid system. And then there's a whole bunch of other cannabinoids. So remembering that they look fairly much alike chemically, but they are different. And that makes the difference between your hallucinatory or your intoxicating effects with THC and your non intoxicating effects with CBD. And for people that say, oh, CBD is not psychoactive, that's another question I have in the online course. And it's like, yeah, if you're going to say it's anxiety alleviating or it's whatever with the CBD, that's in your psyche. So that's psychoactive. It's just not intoxicating. So, just a pictorial representation of THC. THC has been called monogamous because it's really zeroing in on the endocannabinoid system. It's not flirting around and cuddling up to the different G protein coupled receptors and the serotonergic ones and the opioids and all that. It's pretty much staying faithful to the endocannabinoid system. Where CBD, not so much, but that's where CBD gets a lot of effects that are still desirable. So, it's personal preference, I guess, on the cannabinoids part. But okay, so once you get into the human endocannabinoid system or the animal endocannabinoid system, we've mainly or research has mainly looked at the CB1s versus the CB2s, and this is just a stock photo representation of where they are located, but still reinforcing the notion that CB1s are largely in your central nervous system, and in your enteric nervous system as well. But CB2s are, all over the place, with immune system being a really big one, as well as bone. The kitty has it too. So you can find papers when you go online shopping. It might not be free, some of these, but you can find information like on the discovery that, like the dog's knee that with osteoarthritis in it, there's endocannabinoid receptors there. Okay, yeah, there should be, but whoop-de-doo that if we can interact with them, then can we use some cannabis instead of TPLO, perhaps? Um, but just so you know, because THC is something that I would like to see introduced into veterinary cannabinoid medicine in an appropriate amount with appropriate knowledge. But this is just a rundown on its pharmacodynamics with the receptors in that endocannabinoid pathway. And it's a partial agonist at both CB1 and CB2. So we're looking at mainly CNS predominant and immune system predominant. Um, so when we think immune system, we don't necessarily just have to think of lymphocytes or all the different cells, but just even also inflammatory pathways. So ongoing research with THC, again, very diverse because that endocannabinoid pathway is so widespread. GI inflammation is a big one, post-traumatic stress disorder, eye problems, cancer, metabolic issues, anxiety problems. And even when you think about maybe if you had personal experience or just heard about it, like people that consume marijuana or indulge in it in whatever way they do, that you start to become forgetful. Well, that's certain aspects of THC's activities. But when you're using it for chronic pain or PTSD, the question is, what if you are disrupting some of those ongoing circuits of chronic pain in the limbic system? Is that such a bad thing? You know how you might even do this in your clinic, that you have animals go on a pain vacation. It's like, okay, is there a way to halt that reverberation of this negative affect and pain memories and painful memories with THC such that new connections can be found and we can move on? Okay. And then people want to know if you're interested in knowing things about herb drug interactions. And so now that we've gotten Dr. B's attention, it's like, well, is that a problem? Well, she hasn't been studying her botanical medicine, so she doesn't know about um, the widespread issues like we again talked about in the botanical webinar on St. John's wort, and how getting pregnant could be an adverse effect from St. John's wort gobbling up all the oral contraceptives and making them inactive. But But we don't really know a whole lot yet about herb drug interactions with medicinal cannabis, though there are possibly some good things and some not so good things. There are a couple papers on interactions with anti-epileptics, but is that enough to make a really clinically meaningful reason to not use it? And I don't think so. I mean, you can still have interactions, but maybe you can be aware of them and adjust for them, or maybe they are going to be good interactions where for for something like pain, you could conceivably even work synergistically or additively with something like opioids and help to, in the human case, get somebody off of opioids. Anyhow, so what else might be in cannabis? We talked about flavonoids, terpenes, cannabinoids, and oh, then there's undesirable components. And again, I had talked about the 50-gallon metal drum of pesticides being used at the grow operation when we went there um, for CSU to get started with looking at funding for dog studies by a Denver Grow person, and how shocking that was to me when I saw them start to apply this mystery compound. And so, what happens to that, and does it end up in the product? And one of the studies that I had proposed, we didn't get funding. I worked with a pediatric neurologist on putting together a grant proposal for studying cannabis in these kids with the unrelenting seizures, and talking about the potential impurities in the products that they take, and how with their immature blood-brain barrier, that if there are heavy metals in some of these CBD hemp extract products, then that can really cause a problem within their central nervous system. But University of Colorado got all those grants, so we didn't get that. But it was informative to apply for it and to learn from this pediatric neurologist that was treating kids with these problems and had thought about this quite deeply. Okay, so with Deanna, you had asked about the certificate of analysis. So here, well, this is overlapping, but what's in your Florida medical marijuana? Is it safe? There, I'll have this website printed on other ones. I just kept on copying it because this was the most informative site that I have seen in terms of showing you the multiple pages of certificates of analysis for just even one thing. And can you imagine ever seeing something like this on one of those Chinese herb mixtures that they don't even list how much of each ingredient is in there? Um, yeah, that doesn't happen. That's at the other end of the spectrum. So cannabis, even though it's got this legal baggage to it, is like so much safer and better and more disclosed than your mystery mixtures, undisclosed amounts of strychnine and aconite. But anyway, let's go on. So the first thing is the certificate of analysis that you're looking at actually pertaining to the product that you're holding in your hand? So one of the ways is they take a picture of it and have it on the paper there. So there are multiple pages to this. So you got your company, you got plus, passed or failed. So this is just a sample, and it's not really a real one, but it's showing you what kind of printout you can get with here. Let's see. We've got the list of cannabinoids, and so you see the relevance of knowing that there are a lot of different things out there. The D9-THC, that's your delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's your THC that you're interested in. Total CBD there. And in this bottom thing, they are giving you a relative breakdown of the cannabinoids that they actually found in that. So that's just a visual helper right there. So when you see this, you see that, oh, it's mostly CBD, but there's like it's a 1-to-2 ratio of THC to CBD, just about, kind of, sort of. So relative distribution is important there. This one, I love this one. It's got your terpene profile. So you can see some of your ones. Your alpha pinene is like in a pine forest. That's what you breathe. Myrcene is in hops and mangoes. We've got limonene. We've talked about that. Eucalyptol. You can imagine where that's from. Geraniol from roses. Beta caryophyllene from black pepper, and so on. Isn't that fun? And so it shows which are in it. So you've got quite a bit of linalool. I mean limonene. I was going to look for linalool, 0.1%. So, so that's not something that you necessarily as much would prefer for relaxing as maybe something with more linalool. But again, it's very creative kind of practice of this cannabinoid medicine, and accessing different strains of things to make your end product. So here's the website for your floridamarijuana.net, what's in your pot. Insecticides, look at all these interesting insecticides, and there's a second page. I don't think I included that. But lots of different insecticides, residual solvents. So when you're trying to get all your good stuff out of those trichomes, how are you going to get it? Are you going to smash it? You're going to extract it with CO2? What are you going to do if you're using a petroleum distillate? How much of that's getting in there and will remain in there versus gets recovered? So that's where your contaminants are. And then there's filth, fungi, foreign materials, and myriad microbes. Okay, so you see, this is quite a comprehensive analysis that this imaginary company would go through to assure you that um, what you're seeing, and then hopefully that's what's in your batch, because you see up here batch number, batch size, blah blah blah, and then we have heavy metals because as I have mentioned previously last time, cannabis is a bioaccumulator, so it leaches out stuff from the soil. So you don't want a lot of heavy metals in the soil that will leach out and concentrate. But so Dr. B has some more questions. All that was probably too much information for her, and that's why she just wanted to know CBD and just go home. But too bad. Now she's hopefully seeing the light. And just when you thought it was safe to trust a certificate of analysis, then you do that, and this was a Google search from today, even COAs and problems with it. The industry's dirty little secret, willing to bend the rules to keep their marijuana clients happy. So, and sometimes it's the growers who are unscrupulous. So you could look up these stories each yourself. Dishonest potency testing in Oregon remains a problem. This is high dollar business, and these labs want to, make some money too. Testing is bull beep, and you're getting screwed. Okay. So, until there are governmental regulations on this stuff, it's not regulated like we're used to with drugs and everything. And so we want to get better coverage of what we want to know, what's in there, and to really understand what we're getting and how reliable is it. So who's doing the testing? How are they doing the testing? What's the training of the staff? I know when we first started testing things with CSU, in about a year or less, that company had gone out of business, and they had convinced us completely that they were the leading cannabis testing lab in Colorado. And maybe they were, but if you go and look at their lab when it was there were all kinds of irregularities, staff turnover, how were the samples controlled, stored, labeled, mislabeled, all kinds of things. Were they even compliant with regular laboratory testing standards? So many questions to ask. And then, is it organic? Is it standardized? Meaning, are the active constituents at least the same from batch to batch? Is it the entourage effect versus the whole plant, or is it just the CBD? So much to know, but there's there's endless stuff to learn, and it's really fun. So fortunately, we can make a difference by just understanding that complexity and really telling our colleagues that there is research, so you can point to what you have found on PubMed.gov. And when you are talking to clients, that you can educate them about that complexity. And we can work with our colleagues and with the manufacturers to really insist on more information, better certificates of analysis, more disclosure, and not waste your time with companies that aren't going to give you the real story. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions, but if you have any more in the future, contact me directly, Narda, Narda, at curacore.org. Want to thank Shutterstock for all these photos, PubMed.gov for the online free shopping, and Google when needed. And if you just can't wait to learn more, you can join us for 20 hours of race approved CE with a completely online course that we go into all this stuff much more. And sorry in advance, but I always pack in more stuff. So you get done with a module and you might see, oh, it says I'm not done anymore. Well, you're done, but I've already added like one or two more cool articles that I found. So that's just what I do. But thank you for being here. It's fun to talk at you, and maybe I can talk with you if you want to email me, or we'll see you next time. And at next week's webinar, we're really happy to have Deanna Rogers come and join us and talk about getting into animal rehabilitation. So join us again for that, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for being here.